Welcome to our lesson on Camp Through the Eyes of a Child. My name is Erin Dailey, and I'm the 4-H educator in Jackson County, Ohio. This lesson will help you as you prepare for your role as a 4-H camp counselor this summer. First, we're going to look at the reasons why you came to camp as a camper. And I want you to take a moment, you can pause the video, and take a moment to list these things on a sheet of paper. So if you need to pause the video to get a sheet of paper, I want you just to take a moment to list those things. And if you didn't come to camp as a camper, think about the reasons why campers might choose to attend camp. Now that you've had a chance to list those items, I want you to look at each of the items that you've listed and think about how these things might look different from a camper's perspective and a counselor's perspective. Are the things that we want at camp as a counselor or a staff member different than what a camper's perspective is? And think about the reasons why they attend camp. Ultimately, we are all at camp to be able to provide a positive experience for our campers. So we need to be thinking about what their perspective is and why are the reasons why they're attending camp and what we can do to be able to make sure that they have a positive experience. So now I want you to think about those things and think about specifically, as you listed these items, what are the things that you can do as a camp counselor to make sure that these things happen? So I want you to pause the video again and take a moment to list these things on a sheet of paper. Now that you've had a moment to list those, I want you to think about how your actions affect whether or not these things are happening at camp. And so thinking about specifically, maybe a camper, the reason that they want to come to camp is that they want to have fun. So how are ways that you can help to make sure that that camper has fun? Maybe one of the reasons they want to come to camp is that they want to meet new friends. And thinking about what are ways that you can help facilitate that so that they can meet new people while they're at camp. And your actions are affecting each and every one of those things. Your reaction to how things are, how your demeanor, the way that your mood is, the way that you're able to share your reactions of different things. Your mood has a large effect on that mood of the campers and helping those campers to have a positive experience. So as you think about those things, we need to think about how each one of those items, what are the specific actions that you can do to make sure that those campers have those positive experiences at camp. Campers expect your best all the time. We know at camp that sometimes we're not always feeling our best. Sometimes we're really tired. As counselors and staff members, often we may have very long days and very short nights. And so, but we need to make sure that we're giving our campers our best all the time, because when they come to camp, they expect your best all the time. And so your attitude has a lot to do with their experience at camp. If you think things are fun, they're going to think things are fun. And even if it's something that you've done 100 times, how you portray that to the campers matters. So I want you to think a little bit about how many years you have attended camp. So for many of you, that might be 1 or 2. Some of you, it might be 3 to 5. Others might be more than 5 years at camp. And for many of us, we've been to camp for many years. And so a lot of times we don't remember maybe what camp was like our first year at camp. So I want you to take a minute and think about what camp was like your first year. How did you feel? What are the things that you thought when you first got to camp? And what that first year was like. So I want you to just take a moment to think about that. If you need to pause the video, that's fine as well. And even if you don't remember your first time at camp, I want you to think about a time when you were in a new situation. And how did you feel when you were in that situation? If you're in, we've all been in those situations where we've had a chance where maybe we weren't as comfortable. Maybe it wasn't something that we knew a lot about to begin with, and we weren't really sure to expect. How did we feel when we were in that new situation? And what kinds of things did that make us feel as a person? Things that made us feel uncomfortable, things that we were worried about. And those are a lot of the things that maybe many of our campers are thinking about as well. So as you continue thinking about those things, I want you to think about all of those things that a camper might deal with at camp. And a lot of times, as they're thinking about those first time things, you might take for granted things that a camper thinks about at camp, things that that might be new to them. And so I want you to take a moment and put yourself in some situations of some campers that might be arriving at camp, and think about how you as a counselor can deal with this situation to make that better for that camper and to turn that into a positive situation. So I'm going to read the scenario, and then I want you to take a moment to pause the video and write down your thoughts on how you would deal with this scenario. So the scenario is, as a camper, you arrive at camp to find that all of the kids in your cabin seem to know each other except for you. They are all laughing and carrying on about things that happened at camp last year, and you are feeling left out. So I want you to take a moment and think about how you as a counselor might deal with that situation. Now that you've all had a chance to come back from pausing your video and taking your notes, as you thought about those ideas, I hope that some of the ideas that you thought about were ways to make that camper feel included. And oftentimes, what we might see as an inside joke or a fun thing that we're remembering from camp, and oftentimes, those inside jokes or things come about because something that happened at a previous camp experience, and we're laughing and carrying on. Well, we really enjoy that, and that might make us, when others aren't, that might make us feel good. When others aren't filled in on that, it can often make things not seem as welcoming for those people who were maybe not part of that situation. So those are things that we need to think about. And oftentimes, maybe all the campers in your cabin knew each other except for one or two, perhaps. That could be a situation you come into. Not very often. We try to avoid that as camp directors, but occasionally that could happen. And so when you do that, finding ways to be intentional about making sure that everyone is included, and making sure that specifically those campers that maybe you feel like are feeling left out get included as well. So the next situation I want you to think about is, as a camper, you're a first-year camper and you really didn't want to come. You're really shy and you're unsure of yourself. And your mom said you just had to go for one day, and if you didn't like it, you could call if you wanted to come home. So I want you to take a minute and think about how, as a counselor, you might deal with a camper who had that situation. So now that you've had a chance to think about that situation, I want you to consider that as a counselor and the things that go along with that. So one of the things that we see in this scenario specifically is that when parents had their kids come to camp, that they told them, if you don't like it, just call us after the first day and you can come home. That oftentimes can set a kid up for failure. So we really encourage parents not to do that for their kids, to, let them know, make sure they feel secure, make sure that they feel that they understand that you want them to go to camp and have a good time. But oftentimes we do get those parents who say, if you don't like it, just call me and you can come home. So sometimes kids might see that as a easy out. I just have to get through one day. So as a counselor, sometimes we have to kind of try to turn that situation around and really make sure that those kids are having a good time, trying to find ways to encourage them to get involved, so that they are wanting to stay at camp. And a lot of times, as we have campers who maybe are homesick at first, once they get involved and really give camp a chance, a lot of times they're not wanting to leave by the time camp is over. So the next situation that we're going to look at is, as a camper, sometimes you wet the bed at night, and you haven't had this problem in a long time, but you've had 2 cans of pop from the canteen last night, and you woke up in the morning to find that it was a bad night and you had had an accident. Maybe if you just make the bed and hurry out of the cabin, no one will notice. So I want you to take a moment and think about this situation as a counselor and how you would deal with this. And this is something that none of us want to have happen, but oftentimes this does happen at camp. And so I want you to take a moment and think about how you as a counselor would deal with that situation. So feel free to pause the video and take a moment to think of that. Now that you've had a chance to come back, I hope that some of the things that you maybe jotted down as you're dealing with this situation were, the first and foremost is to make sure that we're not pointing this out, that we're not making a big deal of this to point out that child who has wet the bed. We know that these things happen. You're in an unusual situation, and there's a chance that those could be more likely to happen at camp than maybe it is at home. And so we know that this could happen. So the major thing is to make sure that you're not pointing that child out. Oftentimes you want to talk to your camp director. They're going to have a way to deal with that. Your camp staff, a way to deal with if you have a child who wets the bed, because that's something that we're used to dealing with on a regular basis. It doesn't happen that often, but those of us, have been camp directors for a while have had this situation at least a few times. And so often how that situation will be dealt with will be that either camp staff or your camp director, they'll direct you on what to do, and that might be oftentimes that will be them dealing with it, not you, or maybe they'll need you to go up and help to show where the bed is, but they'll use the proper sanitation to make sure they have gloves and things. We'll take that bedding, get it washed, and the best case scenario is to try to do that as quietly as possible when no other kids are in the cabin, and you can get that taken care of, wash the bedding, get it back on the beds before anybody even has a chance to know, or put new bedding on in the meantime. So those are things, the main thing that you as a counselor need to deal with is to make sure that you get that information to the camp director and your camp staff, and that you try to make sure that you're discreet about that so that other kids don't know that, because that can be something very detrimental for a camper if that other campers would find out about that, and they could, really, make fun, or it could really make for a negative experience. So, and if the other campers did find out about it, you would want to make sure that you explain that very, right away that this happens, and to let them know that that is not appropriate to be making fun, and to put an end to that very quickly. So our next situation is, as a camper, you were a little nervous about coming to camp because it's your first time away from home. So your mom snuck a phone in your bag and told you to text her every night. You know you're not supposed to have your phone, but you don't want your mom to be worried. So as a counselor, I want you to pause the video and take a moment to think about how you would deal with this situation. Okay, now that you had a chance to come back and think about that, I want you, I hope that some of the things that you've thought about were making sure that you talk to that camper and talk to the camp director to let them know that, while they can, we can contact their parents if need be, that they can't have their phone in their bag, and that they're not able to text every night. And sometimes this might be a young camper who was put in a situation by a parent who, maybe, was not wanting to have that phone. And that would be a conversation that your camp director would have with that parent to let them know that that's not appropriate, and that, that's not something that would be allowed at camp. And so they would work out with that parent if the camper needs to check in for some reason, when they could do that, when the appropriate time to do that. But as a counselor, your role is to make sure that the campers are following the rules, and to make sure that you let that camp director know about the phone, and let them be able to deal with that situation, because it's not appropriate, even if it's the parent who gave it to them, and it may seem like perhaps, oh well, the mom gave it to them, they know, they were told to do this, I should let this camper keep their phone. That's not appropriate, because a lot of things can happen when a camper has a phone at camp. It can be a big risk for them to have that phone. One, it could be a situation where maybe they call in the middle of the night and a parent shows up in the middle of the night to try to come and get them, and that puts camp staff at a real disadvantage, and really puts them in a difficult situation. Or it could also be something with inappropriate pictures, or pictures being taken, or texting other people who are not at camp. So there's a lot of risk that comes along with that. So you need to make sure that you let your camp director know about that right away, and let them talk with the camper and talk with that parent to explain why the policy is the way it is for no phones at 4-H camp. So as we think about all of these situations, I want you to take a moment and think about what we can do to make sure that our campers have a positive experience at camp. So how can we do our best to make sure that they have that positive experience? And some of the things that we think about are making sure that we plan each of our activities with the camper in mind. Not something that just we as counselors think are going to be fun, but that we're planning that activity with the camper in mind. Be intentional about making sure that campers feel welcome, included, and part of the group. And as we talked about some of these scenarios, you can see that sometimes things that we might take for granted are things that other campers, maybe are not familiar with, or maybe didn't know. And so as we do that, we need to think about camp from a new camper or a new family's perspective, and make sure that we are thinking about how that feels being that new camper or a new family who maybe has no idea what to expect at camp, or has no idea about camp or the facility itself. So in doing that, we need to make sure that we're not making assumptions, that campers know where things are, that they understand camp lingo, or know what to do in situations. And oftentimes these can even be simple things that we often take for granted if we've been to camp for a long time. Things like meal cleanup, campfire, cabin etiquette, group housing, and shared bathrooms. Things, saying, oh, go to the restroom. Well, maybe they don't know where the restroom is. Maybe they don't understand, that they need to take things with them to go to the showers when they're going. That's going to be new for a lot of campers who are new to understand what they need to take with them to the showers, how to organize those things to be able to go and not lose those things and keep track of things. So those are all things that we need to keep in mind as we're making sure that our campers are going to have a positive experience. So as each of you plan your camps for this summer, I want you to make sure that you think about camp from a camper's perspective, and think about camp through the eyes of a child. Be intentional about making sure that each camper has a positive experience. And pay attention to the little things so that you make sure that each camper feels important, that you're paying attention to make sure that they have that positive experience and they each feel like they are part of that camp group. A lot of 4-H camp is about being part of a group and being a part of that something much bigger. Maybe it's your cabin group, maybe it's your groups that they're traveling with to their sessions, whether you call that tribes or color groups or what your camp calls that, or being just part of the whole camp experience. And so that's very important, to make sure that each camper feels important and that they feel a part of something bigger. So as you prepare for camp this summer, I want to wish you luck and hope that you will have a great summer, making camp a wonderful experience for all of our youth in Ohio and 4-H and beyond. So if you have questions about this particular lesson, feel free to call me, or questions about other things in general. You can contact me. My email address is on here, or contact your county 4-H educator or your camp director, and they can answer those specific information for you about camp. So if you have any questions, feel free to contact me, and I hope you've enjoyed this lesson on camp through the eyes of a child. Thank you very much and have a great day.